Sir, I'm Sergeant Wayne Jenkins with the Gun Trace Task Force. The reason you jumped me and stopped is you don't have a seatbelt on. How come you don't have a seatbelt on, sir?
Please state your name and your assignment for the record.
Detective Sergeant Wayne Jenkins.
Sergeant, how long have you been with the Baltimore Police Department?
Wayne Jenkins loved being a police officer, going after the bad guys.
What's in the bag?
He was very smart, he knew the law.
He was seen as like a super cop. That guy gets the job done.
He was on TV at a frequent basis. Unbelievable bust in Baltimore City.
Jenkins commandeers a city van, takes it into the middle of the riot, grabs these cops, and he rescues them. Wayne Jenkins is awarded a Bronze Star for his actions. What people didn't know, the supposed hero went out later and robbed the people looting the drugstores.
I got promoted to sergeant, I believe, in 2010, and then I was placed in Gun Trace Task Force for Baltimore City.
In Baltimore, the officers would stop you, they may take your money, but they wouldn't arrest you.
There's a half a key here.
Wayne Jenkins upped the ante. He was gonna rob you, break in your house, and he was gonna arrest you.
Why can't I look and see what's going on in my car?
It's shocking how brazen he was.
He put the unit in sort of hyperspeed.
He's a psychopath. He's a gangster. That badge and that gun, man, cut him loose.
I didn't see anybody. I only saw you guys walking up my walkway.
We quickly realized that they were just robbing people left and right on the streets.
I'll make mistakes.
Don't touch it.
He had turned into something that was not even close to being a police officer.
We weren't sitting there minding our business. And then
Who they gonna believe? A so-called officer or a person that had a criminal history? I'm a dead man walking.
The criminal justice system is built to believe the words of officers. Because if you don't, then that erodes our belief in what's right and what's wrong.
They lied. That's what they do, man. These guys had the power to say whatever they wanted to say, and people are gonna believe it. Baltimore City Police Department, they didn't care. They just wiped their hands of everything.
That was the trailer for the documentary, I Got a Monster, and this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. I Got a Monster is the explosive story of America's most corrupt police unit, the Gun Trace Task Force, which terrorized the city of Baltimore. Told largely through the experiences of the defense attorney who helped bring to light the systemic corruption in Baltimore's police department, the film rightly puts the focus on the Gun Trace Task Force's many victims. Join us as we talk with Kevin Abrams, producer, editor, writer, and director of I've Got a Monster, about how he and others eventually got this bootstrap project to the big screen. Stay tuned. Kevin Abrams, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Doing well.
Yes, so welcome to the show. For our listeners and viewers, we're talking about I Got a Monster. Is it on Amazon and Apple TV? Is that right? Is that where
Correct,
we can...
yeah. And we're working on doing an additional theatrical release in New York and LA, probably early summer.
Okay. Well, welcome again. It's great to have you on, and maybe I understand you actually listened to a few episodes. So I think you know how we get started here. Maybe you can tell our listeners, what is I Got a Monster all about?
I Got a Monster is a feature documentary that focuses on the victims of the Baltimore Gun Trace Task Force, which was an elite police unit that got convicted of egregious examples of corruption and are now doing a combined total of over 100 years of time for their acts. So we met all the victims and sort of deconstructed what led to the fall of the task force, and hopefully a little bit of the justice for the people involved on the other side.
Well, indeed. And I mean, if there's a lot of people involved with this, but there was this fella named Wayne Jenkins, who's
Yes.
the ringleader.
Completely.
Yes, who terrorized Baltimore for many years. But he's forgive me, I must say, you approach, yet another doc about corrupt cops or or these sort of issues. But he takes the cake, doesn't he? He's quite it's quite amazing what he pulled off or tried to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, the guy from the outside is an incredibly charismatic, effective alpha dog of a police officer. Lifting up the hood, you see a completely different personality that was able to accomplish all those things with a lot of deception, really bad moral decision making, and really abusing a system that he saw the holes in to benefit himself and the people around him. They did a fictional version of the show with David Simon, and he was played by John Bernthal, who's an unbelievably charismatic actor. Right. And I think in that casting, you get a sense of what type of personality Wayne Jenkins is, and how using that charisma and what he was able to do was, I mean, incredibly adept at taking advantage of the opportunities he's had.
But he didn't do it alone.
No, nobody does.
Nobody does. So, it's this gun trace task force that he ended up. But, I mean, how did this happen? Because they, all the people, as your film points out, they all had noted multiple internal affairs investigations going on. It was like a perfect storm. Like if someone went out of their way, I think you even say one of the people in the film says if you were conspiratorial at all, you would wonder about how did all these guys end up on the same team.
And we did, and we explored it. And basically the thesis we came up with is that they all shared a common habit of being aggressive cops, right? That was something they were known for. If you got put on a unit, it was somebody who was basically an all-star of some sort. They were aggressive. They were willing to go out, put themselves on the front line, throw themselves into dangerous situations to make the arrest, to get the drugs, to get the weapons, all the stuff that Baltimore has been really historically worried about as far as stuff that is dangerous in their city. So when they amassed, it was just this really bizarre amalgamation. We always said it was like, a superhero movie where the crew finally comes together. And in this case, all the crew are these corrupt cops. Yeah. And you just can't imagine that people would be able to be moving in this way. But that's part of what the story in the film discusses, is that the system that allows the protection of cops with these types of records and how it favors protecting them over the transparency needed to really have a system of integrity that accounts for their bad behavior and is able to show patterns of this bad behavior over time so accountability can happen in the correct way.
And do you think is this just a Baltimore story, or is it
sadly not?
Yeah. It just happens to take place. I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a while, went to Baltimore.
So I mean, there's been stories there too. Recently, Memphis with the Scorpion unit, there's been examples of them abusing their power. Unfortunately, it's one of the greater conversations that we're having in the United States in total, which is the lines of proper policing and how to have accountability and letting them do their job effectively while at the same time maintaining the rights of the citizens, which obviously in this case got abused and violated greatly.
Yeah, and it's a subject of another doc, I think. But I mean, how do we keep finding ourselves in this situation?
I think it's just very lazy politicking, to be quite honest. Institutional change of some nature has to happen for this type of behavior not to be ongoing. And we'll get these red flags. People will come in, they'll do assessments. Right now, Baltimore is under something called a consent decree, which is a federally mandated evaluation of what's going on in their police department. So people are coming in, they're assessing, they're pointing out the problems, but it's the follow-up and the follow-through that's never really addressed, and the staying power of actually finding a transition to a more effective way that accounts for all these discoveries. I mean, that's going to take fundamental, change from the bottom into an institution that's been around for hundreds of years.
Right.
Baltimore is this really weird litmus test where it always seems to be slightly ahead of what's going on crime-wise. So whenever I hear stories about that, I'm like, oh my God, that's going to ripple someplace else. And like I discussed earlier, you've seen stuff in Memphis. There was an egregious, terrible case of police corruption in Los Angeles with cops actually being accused of being part of underground gangs and going out and abusing people as part of their entry into these gangs. So this power dynamic is really dangerous, and nobody's actually doing the institutional change to alleviate it and to make it not happen anymore.
And I guess there's an element there for some of us raised to always be deferential to cops, and you know, and I think your film really raises the point as well. Like, there was never any questioning by many of the prosecutors or anyone in the system.
Yeah, that's a huge thing that Ivan Bates, who's, I guess, our sort of protagonist in the film, he's this crusading lawyer who now recently got elected to be state's attorney in Baltimore. So he actually has an interesting sort of dovetail of what's going on with his character arc and where he is professionally right now. But he points out, he's like, part of the problem is the system is that cops are expected to be telling the truth, and the people that they have arrested are expected to be lying. What happened in our case is that eventually the federal government went in, and the attorneys that were prosecuting the case interviewed all the people that were arrested. A lot of them had already previous records for abuses of somehow gun possession, drug dealing, whatever it would end up being. And they all confirmed that all the cops were lying and all these people were telling the truth. And that's one of the major things that we try to focus on in the film, was allowing for that version of the story to come out. And when we went into edit and we constructed what this film eventually became, it was always under the pretense of this being a platform for the victims to finally tell their true story and let that be what leads the narrative, as opposed to what the cops were pretending to be true.
Yeah. I think, actually, let's give our listeners a quick early break. We'll be right back with Kevin Abrams, the producer, editor, writer, and director. What didn't you do on this film?
Bootstraps. We did a lot. All of us, multiple hats.
Of I Got a Monster, showing currently on Amazon and Apple TV Plus, and also hopefully another theatrical release here soon.
You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Kevin Abrams, the producer and director of I Got a Monster. Kevin, how'd you become involved with this film? Where was the nexus for
Baynard Woods, who's featured in the documentary, he's one of the reporters that we interview. He and I were friends for a couple of years at this point, and he and his partner were putting together, Brandon Soderberg, who's another local reporter, a book proposal. And as they were developing the book proposal, they reached out to me. We've developed stuff in the past together in the fiction space. And he's like, listen, I think we have a series or a film or something here. And he sent me the materials. I immediately agreed. I was amazed at what they were able to uncover. They were following these cops for, at this point, probably 7, 8, 9 years, telling their stories in local papers. So they had amassed a huge amount of information about what was going on. And through our agency, we were able to help them set up their book. And then we began the process of making the doc, which was a very backwards process. In our business, we usually do this thing where we put together a sizzle and a deck and we try to sell it to streamers or networks and stuff. Went through that lovely process. We had some really impressive EPs at the time and set it up at a streamer. And then eventually in the last hour, as we're literally going to contract, they had a regime change, and our project was one of the few projects that got unfortunately killed. But at this time, we amassed so much content because we kept shooting the sizzle, because we never knew if we were going to get back in touch with some of the people. They were getting a little squirrely about feeling comfortable with what was going on and their protection. So we just, anytime I had the opportunity, I was like, let's just put something in the can. And when that happened, we had probably 100 or 200 hours worth of content.
Damn.
So we went back to one of our executive producers and partners, and we're like, listen, we think there's a feature here. Would you help us, fund it so we can just make the doc? And they were awesome. And they said, yeah, we believe in this project, and go ahead and take the next 6-7 months to put it together.
Okay. Is one of those Norman Lear?
He came on late in the process. a phenomenal ad. We had another project we did with him once again in the fiction space, and his business partner, this guy Brent Miller, is really close friends with my business partner. They've known each other from years through politics and stuff. And we showed them a rough cut of the film, and they really responded to that. And then they came on as executive producers and have been instrumental in getting the film out there and really helping elevate what was, as we discussed earlier, a very bootstrappy production where we all wore multiple hats. I mean, my producers, God bless them, all were assistant editors and graphics people and dealing with, late night Avid issues, as all of these docs sort of deal with. So, but when they came on, it really gave us the opportunity to bring it to a bigger platform.
Excellent. I mean, you were talking about, so do you have Baltimore roots or
I don't, but I love the city. I have fallen madly in love with it, and we're developing 2 other projects focused there. And I think the people are incredible. I think the culture is incredible, and the history of it's amazing because it was this strange place that was north and south during the Civil War.
Yeah.
And, very close to the Mason-Dixon line, and it has the personalities of both sides. I mean, if you go there, there's still leftover cannons pointing north that were relics from what was happening in the Civil War. And with that, unfortunately, comes a long history of institutional racism, problematic policing. And as we discover through the doc, a lot of those fundamental institutional elements still are carrying over into present day and what's contributing to this gross, misappropriation of power within the police department and some of the racial issues that are the result of displacement and or control with what's going on in the city.
Yeah, no, I'll give a big thumbs up to Baltimore as well. I have spent a few.
Well, you're a DC guy, so you're close by.
Well, yeah, back in the day, and it was the only place you could find Major League Baseball back then.
That's
so
right.
So that was one reason. But a few nights in Fells Point and that kind of stuff.
I've done it myself.
Yeah, there you go. But there's also, Baltimore's been there. It's my goodness, it's we've had a lot of shows about Baltimore and
The
policing,
Wire, Homicide, all those. But and then we obviously about this story, so we own this city, and we've got this, as you've already alluded to, this semi-fictional story, or fictionalized. But was that? It sounds like you got into this process way early on. You weren't. Yeah,
were you aware of this other stuff going on in terms of covering this?
Yeah, it was always this funny parallel race we were running. We're very independent in the sense that we didn't have the resources of HBO and stuff. Right. There was another documentary project that was being filmed simultaneously about an element of the story with a cop that got murdered and they thought was somehow linked to the gun trace task force. And there's a big question mark as to how he died or whether it was suicide and all these things. So they were doing that film. We were doing our film. Our writers were writing a book. We Own the City was based on another book that a Baltimore Sun writer was writing, and our writers were sort of like the village voice people of the conversation, much more independent and probably politically left. So there was always these funny. We were interviewing them; they interviewed these people the week before. All this stuff going on, and We Own the City with the muscle of HBO was able to get that whole production done before we even finished edit. We started a year and a half before, but it was actually a great lesson and a creative, I guess, always like counterpoint for us, because it made us really think about what we were going to do to distinguish our film in comparison to those other projects. And the lovely thing about it is people were very open, and there was people we shared in common that spoke to both sides of the creative that would allow us to know what they were doing. So we kept trying to reconfigure our ways to make the story viable in a new way. And that's once again what led us to focus on the victims. And we realized that, they were doing a lot of stuff that was about the police and the institutional elements with Simon, Loves with The Wire that he's been able to deconstruct. So for us, I was like, well, if that's no longer on the table creatively, like, let's even then really own this with our lead, Ivan Bates, and then with the victims and their story. And for me, it gave it a really impressive through line and emotional gravity that I never was initially attracted to, because I saw the sensational Serpico type elements to it.
Right. But no, I think, and as you say, I mean, there's no, I mean, it's a, well, I don't know. You probably don't see it as a companion piece, but they all fit together, right? I mean,
I completely see it as a companion piece, and I wish there were more companion pieces because there's so many other things that are touched upon with what happened that still I think need to be recognized and actually make good, compelling stories.
And what about, so let's talk about the victims. I mean, were they reluctant to tell their stories? I mean, they've been burned before.
Yeah.
I mean, reliving the worst moments of their lives in many cases. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, we were incredibly lucky because we were there on the goodwill of people that were good ambassadors to doing right by them.
Yeah.
Baynard and Brandon, they have incredible journalistic integrity. They're very compassionate writers and people. And reporting on them locally, they have a very good reputation for doing right by people that they report on. In addition, we had Ivan Bates at the time who did a lot of pro bono and work trying to help them achieve better outcomes in their cases, get them dismissed, all this type of stuff. So we were really lucky that our allies locally can speak on our behalf. And because of that, we really did our best to not take advantage of that gift. And when we showed up, it was always under the pretense of whatever made them feel most comfortable. If they didn't want us to film something, we wouldn't film it. If they didn't want us to use something in edit, we wouldn't use it. And we just tried our best to respect the gift of being open and honest with them, especially because of what has happened to them in the past.
Yeah. I mean, Ivan Bates is he's potentially an up-and-coming star, isn't he? I mean,
he's been all over the news recently. He just passed the gun control bill in Maryland, and he's going aggressively after gun control. That's one of the major issues that we talk about tangentially because that's why the Gun Trace Task Force, in essence was created. But it's murder rate is high there, and people are always trying to find ways to bring it down.
And what other challenges did you face besides everything being bootstrapped and not having...
I mean, my back was a huge challenge. 3 a.m. in the morning at, 43, carrying gear around and strapping it to the hood of cars. And I mean, our biggest challenge truly was after we had all this footage, we amassed an incredible assortment, stuff that, we thought when we sold it, it was going to be a Altman-esque tapestry of crime and violence through the filter of this task force and what it meant for a city and what it means for a nation. So we shot everybody. We shot governors, we shot mayors, we shot our police commissioners, we shot a ton of different lawyers, we have a ton of different victims on the edge. So a lot of what our major challenge was the edit. And, we submitted to festivals right before COVID with a 2-hour and change cut, 2:15, 2:20. And super ambitious, and the film didn't quite find its voice there. And one of the blessings for us during COVID is it gave us the ability to go in and keep refining our story. And right now we have a 90-minute film.
Right.
So for us, one of the great challenges was how to balance the sensational and the thriller-like elements with it, with the human elements that made you actually care about the outcome. And with a little sanding, I think we finally got there.
Yeah, no, I think you did. I mean, what about getting the FBI on board too? Because
they were great. And listen, this is a huge testament to their work. So they were proud to share the wonderful work that they did with us. Yeah. So they were very responsive, and we were able to also get the prosecuting attorneys to talk about it too. And they had a lot of work too. And even the victims in particular, they hold them to a high standard, and they appreciate the value of what they did on behalf of them. But once again, I think it was a symbol of the city and the people involved wanting to show that they could address something like this and that there could be good outcome in spite of what led up to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, as you say, Baltimore is sort of ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
In some ways, bad ways, but is this maybe being ahead of the curve in a good way? Is Baltimore setting a standard, you think, for where we could be
I hope so. I mean, I'm constantly amazed and inspired by that city, and so much of it is because of the people on the ground. I have incredible admiration for the reporters. There's a great new periodical come out called The Baltimore Beat, which is local thing that has come out recently that really is like doing a great job about investigating the politics and the culture of the city. They and branding, knowing that they're on the ground there, makes me feel really good about things. They have a great amount of people around them that are all fighting a really good fight. And, you know, Ivan now in office, I believe in the integrity of him wanting to find a safer city for people. And it's, you know, it's crazy. It's the biggest small town around, right? It has a population of about 600,000, but at its max, it was close to 1 million. So it should be housing more people. And because it doesn't, it has this sort of like small town feel within the constructs of a big time city. So things move quickly, and, you know, a lot of people, when they want to get involved, they can be like, listen, I'm running for state, you know, Senate, or I'll do this. And it doesn't feel like a faraway accomplishment. So it's interesting to see how the politics work, and a lot of times in real time there.
Yeah. And before anyone has any doubts, we've not taken any sponsorship from the Baltimore Visitors Bureau or any, you know.
No, definitely not. I'm sure I pissed them off as well.
Well, it's like any major city. It's got its obviously it's had its problems, but no, I think it's. I'm a big fan, and I think it's.
And that was important for us when we shot initially. I remember the first 2 days of shooting, we went to this one area that, you know, by all descriptive adjectives was not good. We could say run down. Not the best version, but it was important for a story beat that we're telling, and we're filming a lot of those elements of it. And Bay and Brandon pulled us aside, and they're like, listen, I really want you guys to be conscious of not making this sort of like real estate misery porn. There's some beautiful elements of the city, and I understand why you see that and you think that's significant to your story, but it's important to us that you balance out all the elements. And I was incredibly thankful for that, because it was the first time that I was like, oh, wow, I have to look at this from a different POV. And then also, you know, when we screened the film theatrically in Baltimore, one of the greatest compliments I got was a person who came up to me and she's like, I'm so happy you didn't just show the rundown elements and you celebrated the beautiful parts too, because there is other things here that people don't get to see.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would echo that. I mean, I think there was you were in some neighborhoods and you panned back, or you had a drone shot or whatever, and I've forgotten how leafy and green some areas are.
Yeah, and there's beautiful parks, and I mean, it's an old city. It's been around for a while, and there's cobblestone streets, and there's those really charming row houses, and there's really some great Americana there. And it was good for people to remind us to focus on those things too.
And what do you want this this documentary's legacy to be?
Listen, I think we're on their way with it. We're getting a lot of wonderful reach out. I am shocked and surprised to see that the viewership keeps growing on Amazon and iTunes. People are talking about it now. It's saturated in the way that we were hoping, which is that when people saw it, they'd recommend it to other people. And I just hopefully would like that to grow. I mean, my only ambition with this whole story went through so many ups and downs with the actual business side of it that, you know, it just became about getting people now to see it. And that's just been our hope, and talk about the conversation. I, you know, said when it was just coming out, right before it was coming out, the Memphis incident happened, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but this unit basically abused and killed this guy in a stop. And they were a similar type of tactical unit as well, and it was recorded, and it was incredibly violent. And somebody was like, oh, your film's going to become really relevant now. And my immediate response was, God, I really wish it wasn't.
Right, exactly.
But it is relevant, and my hope is that I think through our medium, documentary has a great ability to humanize things and to make things feel real, is that people can get a greater understanding emotionally of what people are dealing with that are dealing with, you know, police corruption and the victims of it. Yeah. So hopefully it'll just keep the conversation alive and inspire people to make it something worth trying to change.
Well, and I will say personally, I think it did give me a better feel for having, you know, the victim's perspective. Often that's, you know, people are wronged, but you don't necessarily get what it's like to be on that end of the short end of the stick.
And the simple repercussions. I mean, the couple, the, you know, husband and wife that have the kids, I mean, their story is terrible that they got framed for this thing. I mean, $500,000 of weed, and they eventually had to, I think it was $500,000 in bail between the two of them, which is crazy to think of. But just trying to expunge what happened, get it off their records, how it, haunted them for years as they would try to get jobs, how when people did background checks, it was there. The wife worked with children. It became problematic. Like, nobody sees that. Nobody knows that, sure, they were vindicated, and sure, it came out that they were, involved with these corrupt officers that fabricated their case, but they're dealing with the day-to-day of having to manage that information and just make it seem like none of it happens. And that is a lot for people to handle.
Yeah, that really struck me. Also, the two fellas who eventually did do a plea, even though they didn't want to, and the pressure on them to
that story is just, I watch it still, and when it comes up, my heart just hurts.
Yeah. So what's next for you? I mean, you've got a varied background, don't you?
I do. I do. We have a fiction film, my first fiction project that I've done, that we are in the process of getting distribution for, and we're wrapping up a documentary about the fall of Kabul and sort of the resulting refugee crisis from that.
Oh, wow.
And then I'm going to take my first swing at a genre project that we're putting the final pieces on, and that'll be the summer gig, hopefully. And just continue to try to make stuff.
You're keeping busy. I mean, did you have cameras on the ground in Kabul?
We actually weren't there personally, but we were approached by a team of filmmakers out of England, and they were there in Kabul for the extrication, and they were there specifically covering a bunch of the refugees that went over to Qatar and were trying to find out where they were going to go next. So they shot all this footage, and they approached us about seeing if there was a way that we can weave it into a broader narrative. And we did something similar. We used their stories as ways to sort of illustrate the result of 20 years of bad protocol in this country.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm sitting here in England. It's not just the U.S.
Yeah.
Very similar stories here. Well, that all sounds very exciting, and wish you well with that.
Thank you.
Why I've got you here? So since I do know, we were talking before we started recording that you do listen to the podcast. So thank you for that. What would you like to? Maybe I'll ask. Can I pick your brain? What would you like to? What would you like to see from the podcast? What questions are there? Things we need to be doing differently?
I think you're doing a great job. I didn't realize at first when I was listening to it, I didn't understand that you were abroad covering American docs. I was just like, doc podcast, let me check it out.
Yeah.
And the first one I listened to was the Brett Morgan one, which I found really inspiring, that a seasoned filmmaker with as much great films under his belt was so candid about the process that he went through with the David Bowie doc.
Yeah.
And it's such a cool doc from a creative and sort of formal standpoint that I was really just excited to hear how he got there. And, the stories are similar. You're in the edit room by yourself and you're like, what the hell am I going to do? And I know I have this one piece of good footage, but where do I put it? And, it was really, I know he mentioned that he said that he may take a break from filmmaking. I hope he doesn't, because after that, I saw the movie before and then ended up buying it because I was like, I got to dig into this deeper.
Right. No, I think that was just one of those things said in the heat of just having come to the end of this whole process.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That nearly, I think somewhere else has even said nearly killed him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he had a heart attack or something, which is unbelievable.
Yeah. But, I hope that's not the last last bit of film we get from him, but and I'm sure it isn't. But it's always great to just have that perspective, because it's just trying to understand what you filmmakers go through is there's similarities, and there's also you all have their different personalities and things, and what
in particular.
Yeah, you
got my wife to want to watch the Stan Smith doc. She was listening the other day when we were driving for her to get her haircut, and she's like, "What is this? Who is this guy?" I was like, "Dude, it's Stan Smith. He's a legend." She's like, "Wait, I mean tennis? I don't know." By the end of the podcast, she was like, "I want to go see that doc. That sounds cool. He sounds amazing."
Wow. So. Well, that is Well, that is great praise, and I hope the people from Stan Smith hear that. And
little cameo from the dog.
What kind of dog do you have there? That's
She's a Australian cattle dog and Chihuahua. She's the funniest combo ever.
Well, lovely. That's not. I hate to break it to you. It's not the first dog that's made a cameo in one of our podcasts. But great to have her on. Hey, Kevin, it's been great chatting with you. Again, thanks again for making this film. Really, really enjoyed it. I think it's one of those, as you say, it's going to slowly, the word's going to be spread and people are going to see this, and I think it's a very important film. So awesome. so thank you again, Kevin. Remind you, we've been talking with Kevin Abrams, the producer, editor, writer, director, driver. I don't know what else you did.
We're just documentarians.
Yeah, it's actually pretty much par for the course, having been on a shoot or two recently. Anyway, the film is I Got a Monster. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, go to Amazon or Apple, and also look for it for maybe a theatrical release in New York and LA, I think yours. Hopefully.
Yes, sir.
All right. Great. Thanks
Matthew.
again. We'd love to have you on again once some of those other projects, especially the dog projects, drop.
Thanks for the awesome content. Really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate your comments, and good luck with everything. And hopefully I'll have you on again relatively soon.
Sounds great. We'll speak soon.
All right. Take care. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Inner Sound Audio in York, England. Big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.